you guys. Welcome everybody that came out here today. We're going to be talking with I'm going to bring on a speaker here in just a moment. He's going to be talking about solutions to the youth anxiety crisis. Dr. Jonathan Dalton discussing practical and evidence-based skills that parents can use to help children manage anxiety and develop more tolerance for emotional distress. Dr. Jonathan Dalton is the founder and director of the Center of Anxiety and Behavioral Changes, which provides evidence-based treatment for anxiety and related disorders. He also has an extensive experience in providing professional training to a variety of audiences. Just want to welcome Dr. Jonathan Dalton.
It's great to be here. I often give talks in front of a few hundred people, so it's really nice to be in a smaller group, and I can tailor it for whatever you guys want to learn more about. I have a million slides. I don't need to go off of them entirely. I love my talks to be conversational. So is there anything that anyone wants to make sure that I can talk about today? I think that's really, yes, please.
Screen time.
Screen time. Never heard of that. Anything else? Yes. Social. Okay. Something I specialize in. That would be great. Anything from the younger crowd? Anything that's interesting? Are you guys here because you were kind of made to come here, or are you here because you want to be here? That answers that question. Okay. So I'll try and not bore everybody as we're talking about these things. And I'll try and stay on camera too for the people who are online. So, okay, so I'm a psychologist, and I work especially with kids and teens who deal with anxiety as a part of their life. And I work with families as well. Do a lot of parent training. It's really counterintuitive about what it is that we want parents to learn when we're talking about this. My goals for today are kind of a few different things. We have a full hour and a half, so all of these things and other things. So I would encourage you to ask questions, especially with the younger folks, if things pop into your mind when you're here. So I want to talk about the state of youth mental health in this country, because it is really important for everyone to know about what we're dealing with in our society in terms of the level of anxiety and depression and related concerns among kids and teens. The numbers will take your breath away, and there are some scary topics that we will talk about here, including depression, and we'll even mention suicide for minutes at some point, just to prepare everybody for that. But most importantly, I want to talk about what can we do about it on an individual level. And so this is not going to be a talk about what society or government can do. It's going to be about what you guys can do as young people, or as parents, or people that care about and work with young people. And so that's the important part of today's talk. So I want to begin where talking about anxiety first. This is where I always begin my talks, and I think it's a really important place to start. Because when I work with people who are dealing with high levels of anxiety, one of the things they often feel is there's something wrong with them, that they're broken, or they're less than. Somehow they're not like the other people. And so I want to begin with an accurate but strength-based view of what anxiety is and what it's not. So I'm only half joking when I say, if you have somebody who is smart, creative, and compassionate, the universe will go ahead and throw anxiety for free. Right? It really is a package deal. So rather than being a flaw or a weakness, the vulnerability for anxiety is in reality just a shadow cast by what is so right with them, by their virtues. If we think about it for a minute, anxiety and creativity ask exactly the same question, just in really importantly different ways. They both ask, what if? So it's not surprising that people who are really creative are also really anxious, or at least have a vulnerability for them. We also know that the same brain pathways and mechanisms that light up when we're anxious are the ones that are involved when we are feeling compassion and empathy. So it makes total sense that really empathic and compassionate people have an increased vulnerability for anxiety. We also know that highly intelligent people are more at risk for anxiety. And so 100 years ago, it was called the shadow of intelligence, was our concept of anxiety. And so the great news, there's a lot of bad news, and we talked in the first 15 minutes about the level of distress and suffering that's out there. The really good news is that anxiety is really treatable in the vast majority of cases. And the things that are right with these individuals who are dealing with it, when we can reduce the anxiety, the other things remain fully intact, right? They don't go away as the anxiety goes away. And so in so many ways, people who are dealing with anxiety, they're extra alive. They care deeply about the world and their friends and their family. And so it's so important as we're talking about this experience of anxiety that we contextualize it, that we put it in the right context and see it as a natural part of the human experience that can be highly uncomfortable, or even more so than that, but is really something that goes along with wonderful things about people who are dealing with this experience. Now, I also learned a tremendous amount from the young people that I work with. And so this was a quote that one of my former people put on his college admission essay. This was his first one. And this was somebody who had missed years of high school because of a very significant anxiety disorder. And he said that having an anxiety disorder is like being stuck in that moment when you realize you've leaned too far back in your chair, but have not yet. And I think that captures the experience really well for people who are constantly in this state of being anxious and stressed to a really large degree. That guy, by the way, did great, went to a top 10 university, ultimately graduated. He's doing extraordinarily well. And so we're talking about youth anxiety. We'll talk in a minute about how common it is. It's also really important for everyone to know that people don't have to feel that way forever. They can go on and do amazing things, even if it really, really impacted them when they were younger. So I'm going to talk about some of the numbers, and they've gotten slightly better, but just slightly better. So if we think about in 2021, so 4 years ago, middle of the pandemic, there's so much going on, and that among our high school age girls, 57%, so well over half, reported being sad and hopeless persistently, like a lot of the time. It's not great for the boys. It's almost 1 out of every 3 boys was reporting feeling that way. But this is kind of the degree to which young people are dealing with these high levels of stress. In that year alone, in 2021, almost a third of all high school girls were actively considering suicide in that year alone. Okay. It's really important for those people who work with kids who are a teenager themselves to be aware of this. About 1 out of 4 girls in that year alone made a plan to take their own life. 1 out of 4. And tragically, about 13% attempted. That was in that 1 year. Right. And really, really terrible numbers. Overall, in that year, we crossed a terrible threshold where 1 out of every 10 of our high school students attempted suicide in 2020. 1 out of 10. So you just do the math in terms of your local high school. How many kids go to that high school? 10% of those kids. And we are seeing the extraordinary nature of suffering in terms of young people in this country. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about that a little bit later. I want to just give you a snapshot about the level of distress that we're seeing. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about anxiety. By the way, am I moving too much? So I want to talk about anxiety versus anxiety disorder. One of the things that bothers me sometimes is when I get a call from someone and they say, yeah, my child is dealing with anxiety. And I'll say, well, I'm glad they have anxiety because anxiety is a really healthy and important thing for us to have. I want to talk about what makes the anxiety become something that we call it an anxiety disorder, something that gets in the way of your living. And so I'm going to begin with an example. We'll refer back to this after the next. So I want you to imagine in the morning you're running a behind schedule, you put your toast or your bagel in the toaster, you go upstairs, finish getting dressed, brush your teeth, whatever. You come down, but before you do, smoke alarms going off everywhere. Well, you can never tell by the sound of the alarm if you burnt your toast or if the curtains are on fire. The alarm's going to sound the same. And so we'll refer back to that in the next slide, talking about anxiety versus anxiety disorder. So when it comes to anxiety, to me, it's the flip side of the pain. Pain says, stop doing this thing, you're damaging your body. Don't run on your spring bed. Anxiety says, don't do this thing because you may damage your body. They're both really, to think of anxiety itself as nature's stop sign. Okay? It's what it's designed to do. What else it's designed to do is designed to help us to avoid repeating mistakes. And so if while we are doing something, we get sick, hurt, or scared, we're going to remember that differently. We've red flagged in our memory, and we'll never forget it. Right? You ever had food poisoning after you eat something that you used to previously enjoy eating? You'll know how powerful that is. You're never going to want to eat that thing ever again because your brain is pairing those things together. Now, if this alarm system is working in the way it's supposed to, it's an alarm that goes off when it's supposed to and doesn't go off when it's not supposed to. Think of it like the motion sensor light in your yard that goes off only when there's bad people trying to break in and not when a bird flies by. Right? So even people in the field get this wrong. What makes anxiety become a problem is not the intensity of the anxiety. If you're in a really dangerous situation, I would want you to be really anxious because you're not going to get distracted. You're going to focus on the threat and you're going to keep yourself safe. This is a true story. 2 years ago, my family and I were visiting Western Maryland. And I have 2 golden retrievers, and there was a mother bear and 3 cubs in the backyard. And so we were holding on to our puppy. We didn't know the other dog had seen them. My wife opens the door to take a picture, and the dog runs and chases the mother bear and 3 cubs up the entire backside of the yard, and they disappear. And so I run after them, and I'm yelling for the dog to come back, but she disappears over the hill. Next thing I know, my dog's coming back to me really quickly. The very angry mother bear right behind her, pounding and making weird noises and chasing after her as hard as she could. And so my dog got scared and came to me for protection, hid behind me, and then brought the mother bear right to me. And so the mother bear was as close as we could. And I could see the little mites in her ear, and I could smell her breath. She was not happy. And I was pretty anxious in that moment. And I should have been, right? Because imagine if I didn't have the ability to feel anxiety. I didn't recognize the threat that was in front of me. I would want to go and pet that cute cub behind the mother bear, right? And I wouldn't have done it twice. And so anxiety itself is a really important thing. Okay? It is something that is central to our experience. What makes it become a problem is not how much that you have, but whether or not it's a good fit for the situation. And so in its foundation, we know that anxiety disorders are impulsive, where the fear is real but dangerous. That's the foundation of what it is. Now the problem with that is that just like we can't tell by the sound of the alarm whether we burned our toast or the curtains are on fire, we can never judge how accurate our thoughts about the situation being dangerous is based on how anxious we feel. And so What do? Well, we fall back on what I call our default factory settings as humans, and we avoid. We escape. We run away from that thing. They're running away from mother bears or avoiding them to begin with. Highly recommend it. But if you are avoiding things that are scary but not dangerous, you are in essence firing the very best teacher you will ever have in your life, which is your own experience that would have taught you that while your fear was real, the danger never was. And so that leads to these really important words here. Unnecessary avoidance. And this is something that is really, really important to understand because it is the foundation of what we do to help people suffer less with anxiety. And this is where it gets really counterintuitive, especially for loving parents. And so when someone's in distress and they avoid something because they don't want to feel that way anymore, I want you to think of this in this context. So one of my dogs, they like to beg for food. And it could be really tempting to try and get her away. One of the ways I could do it is I could give her a big piece of my steak and say, now go away and never beg again. But what's going to happen? Right? You're going to come right back and as soon as they eat, and it's going to be really a bigger problem. Anxiety doesn't beg for food, obviously, but it does beg for avoidance and escape. And so when good parents, good teachers, good mentors, when they are enabling avoidance for someone who's anxious, they are doing the equivalent of feeding the dog and hoping it stops begging for food in the future. Okay? Really important. And so we target not the experience of anxiety, but the level of avoidance someone is using as a way to cope with it. Now, here's the interesting thing. I specialize in working with kids who avoid school. So most kids that I work with, the vast majority when I meet them, they're not at school. Sometimes they haven't been there. And so we call it school avoidance, and that's what we can see, but it's not really what's going on. What they're avoiding are the emotions they expect to feel when they're at school. And so avoiding emotions is something that we all do kind of, intuitively. It's something that comes naturally to us, and a really good thing when there's actual danger present. But when we avoid emotions, then we are setting ourselves up to suffer for a very long time in really significant ways. And so I joke that, I direct an anxiety treatment center, but I don't treat anxiety itself. Anxiety itself is temporary and really harmless. Terribly uncomfortable, but the anxiety itself is harmless. What I treat is avoidance, and avoidance can ruin lives. And so if you want to help someone of any age, someone who is dealing with anxiety that is interfering with their life, help them to learn how to cope with it in ways other than by avoiding the emotion of anxiety itself. Okay? The more that you try and avoid the emotions, the more suffering you will have. This is where our intuition goes wrong. Let me stop there for a second. What questions or comments? Is this new information for people? Am I boring high school students to death? Any comments about this at all? Now, some people challenge me on this sometimes and say, no, anxiety is not harmless. It causes suffering. And I have to kind of reword my answer a little bit. So, any questions? So this is the way I talk to people about it, that basically anxiety, fear, and avoidance are all teammates. And so our goal is to help someone to persist, to keep going, even when they're anxious, rather than by avoiding things because they're anxious. Let me talk about anxiety disorders for a little bit. I think this is a really, really important thing for us to talk about here. So we look at anxiety disorders. The research, by the way, shows that about 39% of girls and about 26% of boys will have an anxiety disorder before they turn 18. So these are really, really high numbers. Okay. And these are older numbers, by the way. The new numbers, they're not as sophisticated in how they were obtained, but this is probably an underestimate of the level of anxiety that kids are feeling right now. And so about 8% will have a severe disorder. These are the kids I love working with who have a hard time getting to school on a daily basis. They have a really hard time leaving their house. I saw one of those kids today. And one of the reasons why I give so many of these talks, I'm giving 4 this week, is that a minority of people who need treatment get treatment. Which is hard to talk about because it is so treatable. And so we have the reality that we have these really effective treatments that are really underused by kids and families and other people who could really benefit from it. Right. So I'll talk to them. As an example of how significant the anxiety epidemic is right now, is that even in the year 2000, so this is like quarter century ago now, basically, that the average teen in the year 2000 was between 5 and 8 times, not percent, times more likely to have these symptoms of anxiety than the same age kids did during World War II and the Great Depression. Okay, this is the level of distress that we are seeing right now. I'm curious, anybody have any guesses? No one quite knows, not one thing, but any guesses about what might be going on that's causing anxiety to be multiples higher in the year 2000 than during the Great Depression and World War II? Yeah. Technology, okay. Maybe. I think it's playing a role, but we also think that we might as a field overestimate the effect of screens on mental health. But I certainly do think it's isolating and causes problems. You guys say the same thing?
That's a target in the internet, like social media.
Yeah, social media is challenging. You know, if you're on Insta and you use bold glamour and you're a woman or a girl, you're more likely to have depression as a consequence of using bold glamour and the filters. So that's real, right? We know about that. Yeah.
I was going to say, interpersonal skills, like
Lack of interpersonal skills. Yeah. The teenagers in the last 15 years are the most lonely generation we've ever investigated. So even 15 years ago, the average teen was more stressed than their parents and more lonely than their grandparents. Okay. And so the more people are texting, less face-to-face interactions, it's all perishable skills. Right? So if you're not doing those things, you won't do as well with those things. Anybody else, especially the young people, because you guys are the ones living this. Any guesses from your standpoint about what's going on? If anything pops into your head. Let me talk about the 10 years. So this is a talk about the mental health crisis. Let me talk about the 10 years that led up to COVID. Okay, and we all know what that did, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But in that 10-year, we saw a 42% increase in symptoms of depression, sadness, and hopelessness. A 36% increase in teens who were seriously considering suicide. A 45% increase in teens that were making a plan to end their life. And a 50% increase in teens attempting to end their life. And that was before COVID. That was the water these kids were swimming in before this hurricane of COVID hit. Okay, so it's really important that we have a deeper understanding that this is not a 2024, 2025 phenomenon. This has been building and building. It's really important. We look at 2019 data, so right before the pandemic. Okay, that these are the numbers. You can read them as well as I can, but we do know that girls are more at risk than boys. And we do know that within the demographics, that if someone is lesbian, gay, or bisexual, they did not include trans in this, that it's up to almost 47% who are seriously considering suicide. If they're sexually active, it jumps to over half. Okay. It's really important to know that we have to look within the demographics, to look at the individual experiences of different teens who are experiencing the world very differently. In 2019, again, these are the ones who actually attempted suicide, so it's a terrifying thing to talk about. But it was 9%, which is about where it is in 2023. So it went up to 10 and came back down to 9. If you are Black, non-Hispanic, it's significantly higher. It's about 30% higher than the average overall. And if you're lesbian, gay, or bisexual, almost 1 out of 4 of those students in that year alone attempted to end their lives. Okay, incredibly tragic and high numbers. If they're sexually active, it jumps up to almost a third. And 3 out of 10 are. What is really important, and this does not get enough attention in my opinion, in our field or also in just popular knowledge. So we know between 91 and 17, the rate of suicide attempts among white teens actually decreased. During that same interval, it increased by 73%, almost doubled for our Black teens during that same year. So same years, that interval. Okay. And a Black teen is more than twice as likely to die by suicide as their white counterparts. We all know that suffering is not distributed in an equitable fashion. Anyone who is alive understands that. But it is so important to understand that the arrows are going in very different directions for different teens. Okay. Is this new information for people? I know it doesn't get out in the media very often in terms of the racial gap between different groups of people. Yep.
I was going to say, it's probably close to you here, right? Because I always hear like my father talks in the 1960s, high school.
Right.
And it almost seemed like it was less like, but as time has moved forward, and you would think during that era, more people, because of everything else, then we fight,
Right.
Integration or segregation. So
yes,
surprising to think that number jumps up exponentially just because of what's going on with this now in comparison to what's happening.
so it's a really good point. And so there's also data. If you ever read Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist who was in the concentration camps during the Holocaust, and he survived and wrote a lot about things. And there's interviews you can watch of him talking in the 70s, so forever ago. And he was saying that the rates of suicide among people in the concentration camp was shockingly low. In fact, it was much higher in the welfare states of Western Europe in the 70s than it was among people in the concentration camp. And so one of the theories is that sometimes survival itself, you don't have time to think about the larger issues. You just got to get food. You got to get safety. You don't have the luxury of thinking about bigger issues. And it's just about like my meaning in my life is making it through the day in some way. So that's one of the theories, is that people who are subjected to horrible experiences, they don't have the bandwidth to think of things other than daily survival. That makes sense. And I can't speak in a terribly informed way about that, but that's what comes to my mind first. It is really important that if we know that Black teens are twice as likely to die by suicide, and they're 73% rising where the white kids are going down, we need to look within that. And so if we look at the data that actually predicts a higher risk for our Black teens, here are some of the things. So, of course, exposure to racism, systemic and overt, higher levels of SES stress, we know about that, higher exposures to violence, comes with PTSD, all kinds of things come with that. What's really interesting, and this is only among the Black teens, and it didn't show up in other ethnic groups, was believing that their opinions were less valued by their peer group was predictive of suicidality among our Black teens. it's access to Black healthcare providers is low. I have a treasured colleague, Ryan Delat, who works at the Ross Center, which is up in the DC area. He developed a REACH program about responding to racial and ethnic stress. And he's a Black man, and it's so important that we have more people doing that. One of the things that I want to emphasize, though, and I talk about this when I train mental health providers, is that our Black teens, especially the boys, when they are experiencing anxiety and depression, they see somebody who has a license and initials after their name, they are much more likely to be misdiagnosed as having a behavioral disorder than by having it's called an internalizing disorder like anxiety and depression. So not only do they not get through the door very often, but even when they do, they're often misdiagnosed as having a problematic behavior because that's the part. Another thing that is really important, and I've talked to schools a lot about this, which is also incredibly important. Again, this was something that was predictive of our Black teens, but less so for other ethnic groups. And that's the level of school. How connected you feel in school and to school is highly predictive of how much risk they are at of actually becoming suicidal. So if anyone here works with kids in the school environment, or listening to it on recording or live, know that this matters. And so trying to scaffold connections, what I call anchor points for these kids in a school environment, not only is it going to be helpful, it can literally save someone's life. Okay, and so really maximizing the level of school connectedness is essential. So that was like 2019, right? That was going into the pandemic. And then in the year that COVID hit, this is a study of studies across the world. So they pulled them all together and looked at the effect of the pandemic on youth mental health. And wherever they looked, in any country, they found the rates of adolescent depression and anxiety basically doubled in 1 year time period. So we could see how terrible it was. And then we can see what COVID did to that. There was a bomb going off in the mental health community. Well, back then there was like 10 or 11 of us in the practice. We used to get through our waiting list by the middle of August. We kind of pivot. School year would start, the calls would come in. In 2020, August, we went into the school year with over 200 families on our waiting list. And it wasn't just us. The infrastructure for mental health treatment in this country was never designed to handle this load. It is really, really important to understand. So I mentioned the girls before. It's split shopping. This is across demographics. I mentioned 10%, a terrible threshold of high school students attempting suicide in that year of 2021. 1 out of 10. Was 9%, which is horrible. It jumped up to cross this terrible threshold. Thankfully, the latest data that we have in 2023, it's come down to 9%, which of course is, it's a tragic improvement. It needs to be exponentially more. For our trans kids, for instance, they're the most vulnerable of any group in terms of their level of suicidality. And so this is Russell's team at the University of Texas, and they found that for young people who were allowed to use their preferred name at school, home, work, and with friends, just that one barrier, using their preferred name in those 4 places, reduced suicide attempts by almost 2/3. Okay. With those accommodations, we saw a 7 out of 10 symptoms of depression were removed. And so schools know, because they're in the business, that words can change lives. We now have direct evidence that words, names can save lives. It is so important. We talk about the politics of this all the time. It's important that we look at the mental health symptoms. This is our most vulnerable group of kids. If there are teens who are watching this, right now, if you call 988 and you press 2, it goes right to the Trevor Project for specialized support for our LGBTQ. That will no longer be there in October. Funding has been removed. Even though we know that 1 out of 4 of these kids attempting suicide every year. That's the data. We can't talk about suicide without talking about firearms. Not a political thing, just a reality that access to lethal means is one of the highest predictors of completed suicide. So thankfully, if someone does not use a firearm in an attempt to end their life, they're only successful in ending their life 4% of the time. If they use a firearm, it jumps up to over 9 out of 10. And we also know that over 80% use a firearm that belongs to somebody in their house. Research shows that parents greatly overestimate the degree to which their firearms are secured. Kids can guess a password, they know where the key is, or they know what drawer the firearm is in. And so reducing highly lethal means is the best way that we can save someone's life. The average person who is actively suicidal, do anyone have any guesses as to how long they are before they try and end their life and when they become like they're like, yes, I'm going to do it when they do it? Less than 20 minutes. It is a highly impulsive, desperate action that's oftentimes not thought of even 5 minutes before the attempt is made. This is why things like barriers on bridges are highly effective, because yes, they could go somewhere else that doesn't have the barrier, but by the time they get there, they're out of that really intense danger. This is why access to lethal means such a vital part of protecting these people dealing with mental health issues, because it's such a short window of escalated risk level. Really, really important. I don't worry about that. 2021 is when the national alarm started to ring out, and we saw these organizations came together to declare a state of emergency in children's mental health. The next month, the government did that too, with the Surgeon General. It's a great report. There's lots of really good, actionable recommendations in there for teachers and for parents and for the youth themselves in that way. But in many of the governor's State of the State address, the majority of them mentioned youth mental health as one of the preeminent crises. Again, don't want to get political, but the government just revoked funding for youth mental health treatment in schools this week. That was bipartisan in its decision to use that money, and it's since been removed. And so we also know that if a young person with a mental health challenge is going to receive treatment, 75% of those kids nationwide receive it inside of a school building by school employee staff. So it's really, again, data matters, and it's really important that we acknowledge what the data is telling us. Thoughts, questions from anybody? I can just keep drawing on. I believe very strong things. Okay, I mentioned this, just to go over that. So 2023 got a little bit better. So the girls are now only 53% of the high school girls are persistently sad and hopeless in that year. Still over half, clearly. Chronic absenteeism, which is my jam. People that have a hard time going to school. Chronic absenteeism is defined as missing more than 10% of school days in the year. Nationwide, it increased those 3 years by 91%, almost double. Lots of theories as to what was going on with that, but we're talking about school connectedness, like how important it is to be in a community. But the kids who are most vulnerable are not going, at least not regularly. And we are seeing with that, it's of course loss of learning, much lower rate of graduation, lower rates of employment, but also exploding mental health. Because a lot of those kids, what are they doing? They're bed rotting, right? They're just hanging out in their bed, and depression likes to get people to do its bidding. I think depression kind of like mold. Mold needs certain conditions to thrive. It needs to be warm, wet, and dark. If you get those three things, you're gonna get mold. Depression needs lack of movement. It means social isolation. It means a negative view of the future. And so it sets traps for people. It tries to lure them with comfort. It's more comfortable to bed rot than it is to go to school. And so it's a baited hook. It gets them to seek comfort at the cost of their mental health. Again, really important for us to understand the mechanisms that work. Okay, I asked before about what in the world is going on. Why 20 years before COVID were the teens 5 to 8 times more likely to be anxious than they were during the Great Depression when there wasn't food for people, or when in World War II, wanted to graduate from high school and go fight Nazis in Europe. Why is it so much more now? Well, there's a professor I respect a lot named Peter Gray, an older guy. He's now retired from his teaching at Boston College, but I had him come and train my staff. And what he and his team, and they're very persuasive with their data on this, tell us that screens play a role, but it may very well be not as big as our culture right now believes that it is. What he's pointing to are two really important factors. He talks about how all mammals develop competency through play. Right? Think about the way that puppies play. They practice doing things they'll do in the past when they're old. And every mammal does this. And it's a certain kind of play for humans that matters. People, I'm sure, here play on teams. Any of the teams here, do you guys play any sports or anything? Play sports, any activities they're involved in? A lot of teams do. And what we see is that when you have a coach or a leader who's kind of running the show, it doesn't have the benefits. It needs to be child-directed, unsupervised play. It lets the kids solve problems. And so if we think about the parents in the room, when we were kids, it was like come in and the light goes on in the street. And there were no cell phones. You couldn't track your kids on Life 360 to see where they were. You just come back when you're done. And if you got into an argument with a neighbor and their friend, you had to figure it out. You had to solve the problem. And through that exercise, we develop competency. We develop resiliency. We develop all kinds of positive coping skills through the repetition of practicing talking to other kids in ways that we are designing. The negotiation that goes on. If you think someone found you, they don't think they found you, blacked out. Now, kids are on screens, so I think the screens do matter. And they matter in other ways to be dismissive of that. That they're not out solving problems. And when they are doing physical things, they're often under a coach or a teacher or some other adult kind of setting the rules for them. There's good data that says that risky play, like climbing a little too high in a tree, is protective against the development of anxiety disorders later in life. Getting lost, finding your way back home, gives you a sense of, we call it self-efficacy, that you can be effective in solving a problem that comes up. This is not trauma. Not everybody has the luxury of living in a safe neighborhood where this can happen. I want to acknowledge that, but it's really important that when parents are trying to protect their kids from struggle, they are preventing the development of coping skills. So that's really important. He also, Peter Gray, Dr. Gray, talks about how in the early 2000s, with the adaptation or the adoption of the core curriculum, we have emphasized achievement in young people to such a degree that it's come at a tremendous cost to them. Okay. So between the years 1950 and 2000, I didn't know this until I read it, our country added 5 weeks to the school year. The level of homework and time spent in school, even for 9-year-olds, increased by over 1 adult workday per week during that interview. Achievement becomes something that people confuse with their value in the group. That makes them highly anxious because what if I don't do well the next day? But really important to understand that part of it. And again, there's never one single thing that's causing a crisis as large and complex as the youth mental health crisis, but understanding the importance of play, of helping kids to not confuse their achievement with their value and their work, and finding ways to foster connectedness are really, really important things that can help to shift the larger scene that we're seeing. Any comments? Yes.
I'm always concerned, I heard you say that they've increased by 5 weeks, but here lately, I feel like my daughter doesn't get 4 weeks. So every time I look, she's out of school. What is the impact of that?
It depends on what she's doing when she's not in school. To answer it's the same question. So when I was a kid, it was like I Love Lucy episodes because there was nothing else to do. And so I was bored. Bored, I get creative. So boredom and frustration of the workplace is creativity. So if someone's engaging in creative activities when they're not in school, that can be helpful. One of the things that's so fascinating to me is that as the push for achievement has gone up, recess time has gone down. And that actually is the most important thing for their brain development at those ages is to have longer recesses. Back in the 1950s, they had 2 of them on average in this country. And so as we have sought to elevate achievement, we have, not surprisingly in those numbers, decreased the actual value of lived experience of being a kid. And so if someone is just staying home, parents are at work, the 2 incomes obviously in this country to survive, and the kids staying home by themselves, sleeping until 1 or 2, and not doing anything all day except for playing Call of Duty or something, it's not going to be great for them. If they are going to a really high quality like RT program or something where it's after school or during breaks, that can be actually really but yeah, here you go. All the days off these days, especially during certain seasons. Okay, so now that's kind of the water that our youth are swimming in. How do we both? How do we protect them from what is out there in the environment? And this is where I want to really dig in and talk about actionable steps. I'm going to talk about the way that I work with kids. I'm going to begin by talking about anxiety, because that's my thing, it's what I focus on. And it's the most common of all the mental health disorders, especially among teens. And I will mention social anxiety. So remember I talked before about it's avoidance that we try and decrease, not anxiety itself. We want to change the relationship, and this is true of adults, by the way, too, not just teens, of course, kids. But we want to change the relationship with the emotion of anxiety. That if you are anxious, doesn't mean anything is going wrong. Doesn't mean you need to change what you're doing. And so what we want to do is to help people to recognize that fundamentally, what anxiety is, what fear is it is a door disguised as a door. And so our instincts are, how do we get around this? How do we avoid this situation? How do we climb over the wall? How do we not go into that place? And they end up taking these wide detours. Just leads to more suffering. So our goal is to help them to see where the door is, how it's hidden, how we can open it, and how we move through it. And that's our goal when it comes to anxiety, is moving through the emotions themselves, never going around them as a way to increase our comfort. If we avoid things that make us anxious, there's 2 things that happen. One is that our anxiety continues. And number 2, we develop a belief that we can't handle the experience of anxiety. And so we have to find a way to retreat from it. And that is a trap. It really creates a lot more suffering. To that effect, mentioned before the idea about experiential avoidance, that's trying not to feel an emotion. It has an opposite, and that opposite is called psychological flexibility. It means that we believe strongly that there's not one right answer to how we can cope with it. So I want you to imagine two scenarios. One is that you have a terrible fear of the wind. Whatever reason, I've seen people with weirder fears of it. Pasta phobias I've seen, pizza phobias I've seen all kinds of interesting things. And so let's say that you're terrified of the wind, so you build this bunker. And you put nice furniture down there, and if the wind starts to blow, you can jump down that little that stairwell, and you can be safe from the wind, right? And so whenever the wind rustles, you're thinking, oh my goodness, it might be a storm when you get down there. Well, you will feel temporarily a lot more comfortable when you're down there. You will feel a lot more comfortable if you're near it, so you know you can go scurry away down below the ground if the wind starts to blow. The challenge, of course, is you don't go very far away from it. You become dependent on that experience itself. So it's we call golden handcuffs, where it's like it makes you feel good temporarily, but it constrains you. It limits your freedom of movement. Now, the other one is, let's say that you're a palm tree. And this is what we tell young people, is that I want you to respond to your anxious thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the same way a palm tree responds to the wind. It doesn't fight against it because it has no need to. It knows it can outlast it. Okay. And so the palm tree, if you know you can handle the wind, you have no need for the bunker. And you can go wherever your preferences will take. And that is our goal, is to help people to make decisions not based on anxiety, but based on preferences. To not pursue their comfort, but to pursue their values. What makes them feel alive? What speaks to them? Whether it's hanging out with friends, or if it is playing a sport, playing an instrument, reading books, like whatever it might be, we want people to do what speaks to them, what they value, and to choose that over comfort. And by the way, this is not an anxiety management skill. This is a life skill. This is why I believe that people who have anxiety disorders who go through treatment for it are much better off for having had it and being helped than never having it at all. They've learned things they wouldn't have learned any other way. These are examples of that. Now, anxiety and avoidance, they wear disguises sometimes. And so we know if someone's running out the door, it's avoidance. But it can be very subtle sometimes. And we call these things safety behaviors. Safety behaviors are what we do to feel less anxious if we can't avoid the situation. So this may be giving yourself reassurance. Oh, it's going to be okay. Nothing bad's going to happen. Or it may be seeking reassurance from somebody else. It may be carrying something with you that's like you feel, a little bit safer if you have with you. Whatever it might be, and everyone does these. It's part of the human experience. Is that we are still avoiding the emotions. This is the way I describe it. These are Navy SEALs. Part of their training is cold water immersion. By the way, ocean lifeguards do similar things. So why is it important? Let me ask one of the younger people. Why is it that Navy SEALs or ocean lifeguards would need to gain tolerance for cold water? They're going to use it later on, right? Like imagine a situation where someone's drowning and the lifeguard is like trying to go into the water like this, and it's real cold. Right? It wouldn't work. Or Navy SEALs, if their inflatable gets overturned and they're immersed in cold water, you need them to be able to think clearly in that moment. And so they train them in cold water immersion. You can't come out this picture, but that water is frigid. Now, why don't these guys use wetsuits when they're doing their cold water training? So they feel a lot less uncomfortable if they were wearing wetsuits, right? Well, they wouldn't, because they would defeat the entire purpose of getting more tolerant, more used to the cold water itself. And so when people are doing things that make them anxious, they will try and put a wetsuit on them, something that allows them to still be here, but to be less anxious. We encourage people to not use those things because it actually impairs their getting used to, their distress tolerance of the anxiety itself. We want people to know they're going to be okay, not because they have reassurance or a wetsuit nearby and they won't feel as much anxiety. We don't want that to be the case. We want them to know they're going to be okay because they know they can handle the emotion of anxiety itself. And so as we are doing things, whether it's social anxiety disorder or if it's something different, our goal is to sit with the anxiety itself. I'll give you a story. I'm working until very recently with a wonderful 8th grade girl who missed months and months of school because she has really intense social anxieties. And I knew we could help her. I met her through another organization, so I brought her down. School did a great job. They brought her down for us and worked as a team with her. And we were doing things that made her feel anxious. Like we have fun. So calling, we don't begin with these things, but calling a store and asking for their phone number. It's really funny to see this reaction. Or we try and pay for things using foreign currency. I always have foreign currency in my pocket, so we can try and buy a cupcake. Or ask a stranger for a quarter. Different things. We even change for it's even weirder. And so we go on offense against the anxiety. We do the thing that we are afraid of. Gradually. But we do those things, and then we get used to it. The same way we do in the cold water. That girl, I saw her recently at a school meeting, and we got her back into school. She got into school full time. And she said it was really interesting because I was back in school and I wasn't as anxious as I thought I should be. Last time I was here doing this, it made me way more anxious than it does now. Just like these guys used to have a hard time getting in the cold water. Well, they repeated it over and over again, and they became tolerant of that experience, right? That's how we treat anxiety disorders, is that we linger, we persist, we do it while we are anxious. People often tell me when they first come in, Doc, you got to get rid of this anxiety so I can do this thing. And I would tell them, that's like saying, I'd love to go to the gym, but I want to get in shape first. Doing the thing while you are anxious is the way, it's the mechanism through which two things happen. The anxiety is reduced, and our self-confidence and our ability to cope with it in the future increases dramatically. This is why avoidance and fear techniques and why we lean into, we tolerate the experience, we treat it like the palm tree does in the wind. We do not avoid the emotion itself. Any questions about that? It's the most fun job of it. Help people to get, you should see what Amazon has for my recommended. We have fake vomit, we have fake bugs, we have sage blood, we have a whole collection of fake needles, we have fart spray, people are afraid of that. We have all kinds of stuff in my office. So if you're a young person and you're looking for a great job, working in this field where you get to actually go out and do hard things with people in real life is amazing. It is never boring. Okay. I'm going to talk about this fancy word called resilience. Resilience means being able to bounce back. Hard stuff. Thankfully, there is a lot of research that tells us how we can build the skill of resilience. And I say skill intentionally. Resilience is not a characteristic of a person. It is a set of skills. And like all skills, they can be taught, which means they can be learned, which means they can be practiced, which means they can be improved over time. And so these are not my thoughts. This is what the research tells us is really important. And so as we are doing this, it is really important that we highlight the ones I think are really central, but knowing that all of these are related. And the more I do this work, I've been doing this for 20-something years now, and we are trained with technical expertise how to treat specific mental health disorders. And we, as a field, have gotten quite good. Not as good as we need to be. I'll be the first one to say that. There's way too much suffering. We need to get better at scaling to help more people, because there's too few of us. But even though we specialize in all these intricate interventions, the more I do this work, I come back to this one word, connectedness. Back to this over and over and over. Think of connectedness as vitamin C against mental health challenges. There is no better protective factor that we've ever identified, more than a sense of shared experience and connectedness. Right? And so if you want to build resilience, yourself or in people that you love, focus on establishing deepening connections. It's really, really important. If you are an adult, it positions you in an extraordinarily important place where you can, what I call, cope out loud. Take care of yourself in an observable way. Talk openly about what you do to make sure that your mental health is right. For me, I like going on hikes in the woods. I talk nonstop 5 days a week. On the weekend, I want to go into the woods with my dog. And so I talk for a while. And that's something that is important for me that I've learned really helps me. And the research shows that nature is actually an accelerator for recovery from stress. So it's not a coincidence that I find that valuable, because almost all humans do. So if you are an adult who either has kids or takes care of kids or loves kids, take care of yourself in an observable way. Don't just, yes, it's true, put your own mask on before you put the mask on. We all know the metaphors, right? The important thing is to cope out loud, not just by taking care of yourself, but making sure other people can see the ways in which you do. Acceptance of change. So Darwin talks about this. He said that evolution doesn't favor the strongest or even the most intelligent. It favors the most adaptable. So we know that adaptability is nature's highest virtue. Acceptance of change is not endorsement that you approve of it. It just means that you're acknowledging and realizing that things have changed, and so therefore you need to cope differently than you used to. So the more someone tries to cope in ways that used to work, that's not making room for the changes that have occurred, the more fragile they will be. And so acceptance of change, really. Nurturing a positive self-view. Now, especially during the pandemic. So what grade were you guys in 2020? Like middle school, 6th grade, something like that? Like during that time, many students could not learn effectively. And they didn't understand that it was the environment, it was the mismatch between their style of learning and the technology. And so many of these kids began to believe that they were not competent. They couldn't do well in some way. And they had the opposite of a positive self-view. They began to think very negatively about themselves. Right? I'm going to jump to the bottom one there on the right-hand side. So I believe very strongly that human suffering and struggle are pregnant with meaning and purpose. Suffering and struggle are pregnant with meaning and purpose. If we understand why we're doing something, we are pursuing our values, we are growing from the experience, it changes the manner in which we suffer and struggle. We seek comfort. We need struggle in our lives. You think of like a tiger in the zoo. It's given everything that it needs to all the food. It had to hunt. It can be given the meat. It doesn't have any predators or competitors. It can just hang out all day and bask in the sun. A few years ago, I went out to the Pittsburgh Zoo with my family for a day trip, and I saw this tiger in exactly that environment. And this nice plexiglass like wall, you could come up real close to the tiger. It's like the tiger's dream in so many ways, but it was the most miserable creature. It was just walking in big circles, and you could tell by the matted down grass, which is dirt, that it does this all day, every day. It was the tiger equivalent of a depressive experience, and yet it was comfortable and miserable. And that's something that I see again and again and again and again in the kids I work with is they are simultaneously comfortable and miserable. And so we want to help them to better understand the value of struggle. And so asking people questions, if you're an adult, asking a young person, hey, what have you learned about yourself during this experience that you wouldn't have learned any other? What surprised you about this experience or about the way you handle it? If you are kind of fostering a growth mindset, helping to contextualize this suffering as purposeful. Like MLK said, that undeserved suffering is redemptive. If we can have an experience where we can see our own struggle in a different light, it changes the experience of it tremendously and lets us bounce back or to not even feel the intensity of the stress in the same way that we did before. Okay. What else do people think about when it comes to resilience? Like, anybody want to share how they take care of themselves? Like, what do they do to make sure that they are, doing their own self-care in those ways? Yeah.
I said, I'm good with the gym, work out.
Yeah.
And then,
Two, like A+1s. Exercise, especially a lower body workout, is as effective as meditation for treating moderate depression. Meditation has been shown to actually change the structure of the brain. You can do MRIs of Buddhist monks, and we can see visible differences in the way their brain processes information in a very healthy way compared to people who don't meditate. I do both of those as well, and they're really important to do. Yeah.
I would say the positive influences we have around you foster that.
Yeah. So like asking for help if you need it is a huge thing for people to do that. And guys in particular have a hard time doing that. Using the resources of a wide variety of different things. And so that might mean calling up a friend and being like, hey man, I just having a hard time. Or hanging out with people that you really care about. And making sure that you're available for them, not just physically present, but you're available for them. I mentioned before the idea of a lot of the young people were developing a negative self-view during the pandemic. They just couldn't learn very well. But what young people lack is context. They don't understand that matters a lot. And so I think of it a lot during those years, but also I see so many kids that are taught in the wrong way because they learn different. They have special learning styles that are not we give every kid the same job, right? Imagine if we give every adult the same job. That wouldn't make any sense. And we give every kid the same job. You want to go to the same school everybody else goes to, do what they do every day. It doesn't work for a lot of the kids in that same way. And so helping them to see, this is a real picture, this guy should be banned from ever is on the beach. And of course it got stuck. Similar car there on the right. And it's beautiful. It's got the same engine, it's got the same suspension, it's got the same exhaust, same everything in both pictures. But in one, it's being asked to do something it was never designed to do. But the problem is in the Ferrari, the problem is where you're driving. If you ask somebody who's going to win in a race, a Jeep or a Lambo, well, it depends entirely where you're racing. Because if you are racing on the street, it's not even going to be a close call. If you're doing it on the lead, the sports car won't go 3 feet. And so helping people to see that if school isn't your jam, it's not a place that you really feel connected, it's not really your thing, look for something that is, right? Understand that there are different environments in which you can thrive. I see plenty of people that get really into music, really into audio editing or different kinds of things. And so we don't want to say just pursue your passion. We want people to, that doesn't always work, obviously, in those ways, but understanding that sometimes it's not you, it's the mismatch between you and the environment that's causing the problem. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Tolerance of uncertainty. I have 3 kids, love them all desperately. I don't know if all 3 of them are still alive right now. I haven't talked to them in a couple of hours. I'm okay saying that because it's a thought. And thoughts aren't dangerous. I don't need to run the phone and call and make sure they're all okay because I had that thought. And yet I am uncertain about them, as you are for everyone you love who's not in this room. We never know if the sun's still there. It takes 8 minutes for light to come to us from the sun. It could have blown up 4.5 minutes ago, and we would have no idea. We have tolerance in all areas of our life for uncertainty because we have to. We never get access to certainty. And yet, we know that people that have a vulnerability for anxiety, they respond to uncertainty in the same way other people respond to actual threats and danger. And so anxious people tend to have a hard time tolerating uncertainty. And what they do is they try and figure out a way to feel more certain. Now, they're never certain, but they try and feel certain. But that's like trying to grab a handful of smoke. Right? You see it, you try and grab it. As soon as you grasp for it, it's gone. And so instead of trying to be certain and give yourself an illusion of certainty, which is all it will ever be, we teach people to tolerate uncertainty itself about a bad thing happening. You know, whatever the anxiety might be, but the classic ones I've seen this week. Right? Could I have a brain tumor? Maybe. Probably not. Maybe. Is someone I love going to get really sick? My crystal ball is clouded. I don't know for sure. We can think of any kind of anxiety disorder or any kind of worry somebody has, and it is always based on uncertainty. I think of an anxiety disorder as an allergic reaction to uncertainty. And so the kryptonite, one of the things we most want to do is to learn that it's okay not to know for sure. So if you get a what if thought, what if I'm giving this class presentation and I say the wrong thing and people are offended? That came up today in a section I was doing. The answer is that's it. And then go on, right? You want to acknowledge that would be an uncomfortable thing. What if you had a brain tumor? That would be a bad day, right? Yep, that's up. And the more that we don't take the bait and try and get into an argument or a chess match with different parts of our brain saying, I'm probably not having that medical problem, but I might, right? And you're going to be thinking about it the whole time. Our idea is like, yeah, that would be it. And leave it at that. Okay? A lot of people deal with scary thoughts in the same way. I want you to imagine that you're standing in the street and this like beast ball towards you, you're standing there. And you think, oh my God, this is a terrible thing. Let me try and splash it, keep it up. I don't want it to come near me, this thing. I need to push back against this ball. You're going to spend the whole time the ball going up and then back down, up and back down. And the whole time you're focused on the ball. The best thing is to realize it makes you anxious and let it just go by. Not try and get rid of it. Okay? Trying to not have an emotion is like trying to flatten water because it's too wavy. Oh, that wave's too big. Push it down. We end up just making more. Right? One of the common threads across all the anxiety disorders, a lot of different ones that are out there, is that people think their thoughts are more important than they are. We want to say, thoughts happen. Or if you're somebody, and this is, by the way, the research shows all humans have this experience, where you have an unwanted scary thought, a what if thought come into your mind. Well, what we do is a simple thing, is that we kind of preface that scary thought in our head with right now having a scary thought about. It's like reminding yourself you're watching a scary movie when you're watching a scary movie. It's getting the behind the scenes footage to your own scary thoughts. It's realizing that you're telling yourself scary stories. That's the sum total of what's going on in that. So we don't want to overvalue those thoughts. Yeah.
I have a quick question regarding to thoughts. Okay, so how you mentioned to go ahead and pay attention to the feelings. It's very important. So how or what would you say to someone, like, listen to your thoughts, pay attention to your thoughts, sense the feelings, feel the emotions, but do not attach to them?
So that's a great way of putting it, but I'll explain it a little bit more fully. The question for those people online was like, well, we're going to acknowledge and experience the emotions, but what do we do with the thoughts? How do we deal with the thoughts? So there's no wrong way to feel. There's no broken emotion, just like there's no misshapen clay, right? So we never want to think that we shouldn't be feeling this feeling. We want to radically accept the emotions that we're currently experiencing without believing that the thoughts underlie it. So without evidence, thoughts are unimportant. All right, I'm having a thought and fill in the blank with some scary. We overvalue that thought, we suffer. But the emotion, even if it's a false alarm, even if we know that this isn't like, an important, it still might produce a whole level of anxious arousal or despair or depression. So just sitting with, right now, I'm feeling this and I'm strong enough to sit with this emotion. Because so many people, like they know their thoughts don't make any sense. But all that does is increase the frustration that they're still bothering so much about it. So we just want to acknowledge that thought is there. We notice it's occurring. It's present in our life right now. We don't want to confuse the thoughts with evidence, but we do want to sit with the emotions that we feel. Yeah.
I was going to comment that this one, and one of the comments that she made was feelings are information, they're not facts. And not to really get into those emotions, you acknowledge that it exists and that they're there. They should allow you to ask more questions. Why am I feeling this? What triggered this? What are some things I can do? How I move past in order to get through this?
I love that. And I would even add to that, that emotions are more than information, often they're wisdom. They tell us what's important in our lives, response. And so let's say that I am having a thought that one of my kids is sick. No evidence of that, I'm having a scary thought. I can acknowledge that I'm having this thought. Right now I'm having a scary thought that my kid is sick. Right? I can tell myself, this speaks to my value, that I love my children. And so this is bothering me precisely because it matters to me. This is part of my value system, my belief system in those ways. And I can sit with this emotion itself, and I can tolerate the experience of it without trying to get it away. Right, let me give you an example. Let's say, and I've seen this, let's say there is a kid, and I see, by the way, adults with this fear as well, fear of butterflies. Let's say a little kid comes to me and they have a terrifying fear of butterflies, and they won't go out to recess. It's May, and there's butterflies nearby the field. Well, I would never, but I could, this little kid come in, give them like a Batman utility belt full of fly swatters and bug spray and say, all right, now you can go out to recess. Well, why wouldn't I? Because she'd probably go, or he'd probably go. Well, there's three problems with that. Number one is that the whole time they're out at recess, they won't have a good time because they're hyper vigilant for butterflies. Number two is that they lose their fly swatter or run out of bug spray, their anxiety will rise to the highest levels at the bend. Every time you spot a butterfly, you are teaching your brain they're dangerous and you can't handle them, right? And third, and most importantly, they would never learn butterflies and harmless. So we want the butterfly to land. We want the emotion to be fully present, fully manifest in their lives in that moment, and to develop a healthy relationship with the emotion, even if it's based on a thought that is likely totally inaccurate. Does that make sense? Let me tell you a story. There we go. So a number of years ago, I was working with a young woman. She was a high school student. Missed a couple of years of high school. She had social anxieties. And it was a really significant. And it was our second session here in Virginia. And I'll never forget, she had a very low voice volume. She didn't like eye contact very much. She was very afraid of being judged. And one of her big fears was going back to school and people like, hey, where were you? And like judging her for not being. And so I asked this question, and I said, hey, I want you to fill in the blank. I can be anxious and blank at the same time. And she thought about it for a minute. She got like a super serious look on her face, thought something was wrong. So I asked her, are you okay? She said, yeah, I'm good. Then she leaned in a really firm voice, good eye contact. She said, I can be scared and brave. I can be anxious and strong at the same time. And she was right. She could be anxious and strong at the same time. She got back in the very next week, graduated on time. I asked an older kid that through a lot of challenges, said, I can be anxious and any damn thing I want to be at the same time. And that's kind of the foundation of what we do, is to help people to be anxious, to be fearful, to be scared, and something else at the same time. We're trying to separate, trying to divorce the emotion of anxiety from the action of avoidance. Right? You want to think of the anxiety itself or any other negative emotion as somebody who jumped in your car, you don't know them, but you can't kick them out. But one thing you'll never ever do is give them the steering wheel so they can choose where to go. It's an unwelcome passenger that we just take along our life. And the more we do that, the less power it has, the more it shrinks over time by simply not changing what we're doing to alleviate the experience of anxiety or other emotions. Okay? If there's one thing I can tell younger kids, the top thing can be scared and brave at the same time. Right? That is the foundation of what we do. I'm aware of the time. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. Let me just go through one example and then we'll open up. So let's say that there's a bird on a branch, and this bird looks over and sees there's a crack in the branches. Is the bird unafraid because it can think of all the reasons why the branch is strong, unlikely to break? Or is the bird unafraid because it knows love? Knowing you can fly, knowing you're going to be okay, not because a bad or hard thing isn't going to happen, but you're going to be okay because you can handle bad and hard things. You're going to be okay, not because you want to experience anxiety, but because you know you can handle the experience of anxiety. That is what we're looking at. That echoes in someone's life for years, if not generations later. So as we are aiming about this epidemic of anxiety and other challenges, we want to not hide from our emotions. We want to see them accurately as a field we move through. As we move through these emotions, we learn that we can tolerate them, that we're stronger than we suspected. We can do more than we thought. These are the things that on a granular level, on an individual basis, those things about being scared or sad or something and still pursuing your values. If you are anxious when you are pursuing your values, that's like getting sweaty at the gym. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, it means you're getting a good one. Okay, so with that, we have 5-ish minutes of Q&A. Yeah.
Using medication to treat anxiety, not or like different avoidance, like is that the way?
Great question. This is a medication question about is using medicine for anxiety, is that avoidance? To me, it's a stepping stone. So a lot of people need to reduce their nervous system level in order to do those things. So the kids that I work with, about 80% come in already on meds. The data from the best studies we've done was a really good study done a number of years ago now. They found that doing like cognitive behavioral therapy, what I do, plus medicine, they use all in that study, have the best outcome than either one of those. You got to choose between cognitive behavioral therapy and meds. Cognitive behavioral therapy is more effective than meds. Two together are more effective. A lot of my kids I work with kids who are very traumatized affected. And so we do exposure therapy. People do things that are hard to them. Sometimes kids' nervous systems are so elevated that getting them on, like, an SSRI, for instance, can be really helpful to reducing their suffering, but also, give them more of an ability to do that. My standard answer, if someone comes in and they're not on meds, I want to do about 3 months of high quality treatment from a behavioral standpoint before we do meds. unless there is depression that's co-occurring, that's significant, that's part of a trait behavior, or if someone is suffering just immeasurably on a day-to-day basis, or if they're not able to use the skills for some reason, then we'll do that more quickly. But I'm not at all opposed to meds. I have a couple people when I saw today, I was trying to get on meds, but he has OCD about brain damage, and so it's going on meds terrifies him because he's afraid of it's not actually going to happen. He's afraid of it. Meds do have a black box warning, so it does have a level of suicidality among young people. A lot of us believe what actually happens is that it gives people more energy before it gives them improved mood. So a lot of those people didn't have the energy that in order to like get to that level. And so as we're beginning SSRIs for people who are like, teens or younger, we are very careful monitoring response to them. You guys did awesome. I'm sure this is the last thing. You guys at school today, right? And then you come in here afterwards for an hour and a half here and we talk about something that you didn't particularly choose to come to. And that way, I really appreciate you guys being here. I love it when kids are here because it's things that you might not like think about right now that might come up a little bit later. Yeah.
So my brother is anxious when it comes to bridges.
Bridges, yes.
Be the first step.
So I see that all the time. The Bay Bridge going to Ocean City is the big one around here that people kind of have a hard time with. And
In the Bay Bridge, I did have a hard time.
I used to as well.
Yeah.
I used to as well. I got dizzy in one of the ones. Well, so what we do, I have a whole YouTube thing. So we'll do a point of view driving thing, and then we will do other things, and then we'll go over smaller bridges and build up. We get to the Bay Bridge. Here's the trick too, is that you go over it, and then you make a U-turn, and you go back and forth over it. Just like the goosebumps hold water, stand long enough, they go away. Same thing happens for exposure therapy. It's that the longer you're on, maybe a 9 or 10, windows up, windows down, like the left lane, right lane. I have some people that will like tailgate an 18-wheeler, so it limits their view. They can't see things in that way. And so we go back and forth, and the anxiety might come down from a 9 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10. And now your brain is pairing the bridge 5 and a 9. And that's how we learn to be afraid of paired association. And how we learn not to be afraid is by pairing that situation with a lower level of anxiety.
Because when I'm exposed to certain things, you're right, because going over certain bridges, it changes, right? So that's, I'm going to visit my parents, I gotta go over.
Right.
It becomes less of an issue because I just didn't think of it, right?
Right.
And I made these associations with even different routes on because highways also.
Avoid highway.
Avoid highways. I do all these different wild things. But I try to, but certain stretches, the road I'm good.
Right.
Then I hit a different stretch, same road, where it's.
So as an example, common fear is being in the left lane and having an 18-wheeler to your right and you can't get over. Right. And you one of those right pass. You can't pass and like you're stuck and then you have a panic experience and you want to get over it. So what we'll do eventually is that we will drive on the highway until we find an 18-wheeler in the second to left lane and we'll paste it in the left lane. And so the idea is that we target with precision the actual set of environmental cues that trigger that response until the goosebumps go down when it's staying in. Really effective. But don't use the Google avoid highways or avoid bridges button because avoidance is the enemy, not anxiety.
Right.
Yeah, you and everybody else. Yeah, 40 million American adults have issues with this stuff, so like most of us do at some point in our lives.
Would you say that it's okay to throw a kid in the pool?
Oh yeah, like surround kids all the time works for this. So go in a little bit and then do a little bit more, a little more. We want to make sure they get swim before we totally throw them. I know we're out of time, guys. Thank you so much for coming in.